Okay, so welcome everyone to the local government broadband webinar. We're very excited to see this many folks this morning. Thanks for giving up your Monday morning. And I hope everyone has a cup of coffee to keep them going until 1. The goal of this webinar is just to kind of bring together county and city officials to talk about where they are in their broadband process. I know some folks have applied for money, some folks are still in a planning stage, some people are like, broadband's great, how do I get it? So we're really going to try to answer some of those questions today, and then also provide some great networking for everyone to kind of share what you've learned in your journey, and how other communities can find resources that you have. So we'll do quite a few breakout room discussions, and that's where we'll kind of delve into hearing from you all. And so I hope everyone's ready to participate. And Mallory, do you want to add anything before we get kicked off with our first presenter?
Really, I'm just so glad to see all of you here. I look forward to a really great conversation. And Jenna, why don't we hand it over to the wonderful Representative Pam Marsh?
Yep, our first speaker is Representative Pam Marsh, and she'll be giving us a state legislative update.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So nice to be here with you this morning. Just to give you a little bit of context, I'm Pam Marsh. I'm the state representative from Southern Jackson County. And I have a district that sits just above the California line. And I've been in the legislature now this is my 3rd term. When I got up to the state capitol, I looked around and was shocked at how little focused work the state was really doing around telecommunications. Certainly 5 years ago, we were looking at that going, that's the most valuable economic development tool that we have. And the state was doing a very good job handing out money when it came our way, but we weren't really engaging in the work of making sure that communities have what they need to have robust broadband systems. So we started working on that. And then, of course, in the past year, we've all been immersed in an unforeseen and never before experienced pandemic. And I would say that one of the positive things that came out of a pandemic, if positive things can come out of such an experience, was a recognition that now widely endorsed and certainly understood by many of us before a pandemic, that telecommunications is absolutely vital for everything that we do. And we also have huge gaps across the state in the ability of residents and families to access that technology. We certainly vital and accessible are 2 different notions in the world of telecom. People who did not have broadband over the past year missed out on opportunities for work. Their kids struggled to be online for school. They missed out on higher ed opportunities. Sometimes they missed out on emergency news that was being conveyed over the internet. They missed out on telehealth opportunities. They missed out on Zoom Y classes. They missed out on the opportunity to join in church services that were held over the internet. And certainly they missed out on opportunities just like the one that we are engaged in today. So the gaps are enormous, and Business Oregon tells us that they are also significant. In data that was accumulated just before the pandemic, Business Oregon put together a robust report in January of 2020 describing what the gaps are, and identified that 20% of people who live in urban areas and more than 40% of people who live in rural areas across the state lack 10.1, have nothing better than 10.1 internet or have none at all. Now, those of you who are in the weeds on all this know that 10 megabits is hardly anything. Many of us would consider it much the old age. The FCC defines 25.3 as being kind of a minimum residential standard. And as we look toward the future, there are probably very few people on this line who think that 25.3 is anywhere where we need to be, as much of our lives shift to increasingly sophisticated internet applications. So we are behind, and we know additionally that those gaps disproportionately impact low-income people and people of color. And you can recognize that when you look even at our institutions across the state. We know, and the data is a little dated now, but it is likely that as many as 50 schools across the state of Oregon don't even have that 25.3 residential standard of internet service. And recent surveys of our libraries show that at least 25% don't approach that 25.3. I find that library number particularly distressing because libraries, as we know from what we've just experienced and what we knew actually before even a pandemic, is the place where people go to access technology when they don't have it in their own homes. And we have 25% of our libraries that can't even provide what the FCC would designate as a decent residential service. So why do we have these gaps? We have them because of a lack of infrastructure. We have places in the state, many of them represented probably by people who are on this phone who simply don't have access to any kind of internet or have access to really very slow internet services. But secondly, and this was really emphasized during the pandemic, we have a lack of affordability for many people, particularly I think that 20% of people who are in urban areas, a significant number of them may have access to services, but families can't afford the $50 or $75 a month that it might cost to bring those services into their home. And third, we have a gap around the education and access to devices. Again, that was another issue that became particularly acute during a pandemic. When you look at how we've coped over the past years, especially health services and the K-12 system and our educational service districts, our ESDs really responded to the pandemic and the need for telecommunication services on all of those fronts, on the infrastructure, the affordability, and the device front. We sent hotspots out. We had providers who set up hotspots in the parking lots of libraries or other public places. We tried to subsidize people's rates. We sent out devices. We provided Chromebooks to kids and to people who were trying to get health services. All of that was wonderful, but what it really does is to spotlight the ongoing problems. We had temporary responses to that, and we have ongoing and permanent problems that we as a state have to address. So what did we do at the state level during the past year? Well, that was the context of the pandemic that we walked into. And the good thing there is that, again, our gap in telecommunications was evident to everyone. It has elevated to being a priority across parties, across the urban-rural divide. We all understand now the telecommunications have to be at the top of our list. So these are the things that we started to do during this session. First, we put effort into building our institutional capacity. A few years ago, 2019, we established a state broadband office. That was kind of the first effort that all of us who came together a few years ago really focused on. Because if the state doesn't have a place where the work around internet actually takes place, then we don't have the capacity to support local communities or to get the state ready when funding opportunities from the feds come forward. So we established the state broadband office in 2019. Unfortunately, we've never really funded it. We've had two wonderful people, Chris Tamarin and now Daniel Holbrook, who you'll hear from later this morning, staffing that office. They've both been great. One-person offices are not big enough to do all of the work that's in front of us. So we are hopeful that in the budget that was just passed, and not everything is signed, and Daniel can give us a bit the latest update when he speaks today, but we're hopeful that that budget will provide Business Oregon with the capacity to actually add several staff people to the Business Oregon broadband office, and thus, for the first time ever, actually have a minimum capacity out of that office to be able to support local communities and to get this state ready for the tremendous amount of federal money that we see coming this way. So building the institutional capacity was the first charge of this session. The second thing we tried to do through legislation was to begin to address some of the infrastructure barriers that sit in the way of actually building systems. And I would point to a couple of bills that were put forward and that passed during this session. The first one is House Bill 2411. This is a bill that I put forward that will require the Oregon Department of Transportation to work with the state broadband office when we are doing trenching projects. In essence, nobody ever wants to bypass the opportunity to make use of a good trench when it's open. So ODOT will have a responsibility for designated projects, working with the broadband office to identify providers who might want to partner in that. They'll still have the opportunity to work. They'll have to work with those partners to make sure a project makes sense, and that it's the right kind, that using that trench for broadband infrastructure is going to work. But this opens the door to make sure that we have a transparent project and the opportunity to take advantage of every partnership possible with ODOT. So that's a big step forward, and an approach that is being increasingly emphasized at the federal level. The second barrier bill that I would point to in this talk is House Bill 2654. This is a bill that was put together by our electric co-ops across the state. In its first incarnation, the bill would have affected all electric utilities. As we worked our way through amendments, the bill was winnowed down so that it affects only the electric co-ops, but it gives the electric co-ops the ability to really use their easements, sets out a course for them to use their easements, their electric easements, for the provision of broadband, as well as those electric lines. We know that in many rural areas of the state, that electric infrastructure is based, those poles and lines are all we have leading into our most remote areas. So to be able to use them in double duty and to start to engage the electric co-ops that really want to be in this business in a more robust way in the provision of broadband is a huge step forward. The co-ops are very excited about it. I think all of us should be excited about it as well. And I already have on my list, and in the undone category, is to start to figure out how to engage our bigger utilities, our IOUs, PAC, and PGE in broadband in a more robust way too. Still to come. And then the last thing I want to note that what we did during the session is we allocated funding. Again, we have funding to expand the broadband office. We also put in the end of session bills $17.5 million toward schools to allow schools to finally take advantage through the E-rate program of federal money that's out there. Through the federal E-rate program, some of you may be familiar with it, some it may be new to others. E-rate program applies to libraries and schools. If the state has set up an E-rate program and provides 10% of a broadband project's funding, that school district can bring down as much as 90% from federal funding, meaning in many cases, big, very expensive, very difficult broadband projects can be done for essentially no cost to the local district. And we know that these are our most remote, struggling local districts. So to be able to come up with even any significant money to put into broadband is going to be beyond their capacity. In the past, we passed up federal money because we didn't have money from the state for that match. Now we actually will have money set aside. We should be able to really go after those E-rate projects in a really robust way. I'm very excited about that. The state library got money from the Federal Rescue Act to work on a number of different fronts, among them including digital equity. I think we're going to be looking to the state library for a lot of that work and to set up programs across the state. I'm excited to meet with them later this week to find out what their plans are. And then finally, the state got $120 million in federal rescue monies from the feds. Those will be distributed by the state broadband office in a series of grants. I am hoping that we will put a significant chunk of that money, and again, Daniel will update us, but I don't know that we have all the rules available yet to tell us what we're going to be able to spend that federal broadband money on. But I am hoping that we'll be able to spend a good chunk on it on the basic function of mapping. As many of you know, if you've started broadband projects in your communities, just knowing where we have services, how robust those services are, where we need to build out, is often stymied because we just don't have good data. That we've done some preliminary mapping. It's pretty basic. We really need to put a good chunk of time and money into understanding much better on the ground what our broadband circumstances are. And then finally, just one comment that I would leave you with. As we approach this federal money and look at investing in grants and in communities, and hopefully many of you will have projects that are ready to go here and that can benefit as we get our grant program together and the rules together from the money that's available. We also really have to be looking big picture. This is our opportunity. We have federal money now. We're going to see more federal money in the next year or two, because broadband's right up there at the top of that federal priority list. And we need, as a state, to be really strategic, not only about individual community needs, but we need to be strategic about building out the backbone infrastructure that's going to feed all of those communities. And we have, I'm very happy to say that we have providers who are looking at those issues and trying to help us really make sure that we invest wisely in the big picture infrastructure needs of the state, so that when communities come forward with projects, we are actually prepared for those projects to be able to hook in, and that we have an infrastructure that will take the state into the next decade. So thank you. Perhaps I may have spent more time than I was supposed to here, but I hope that gives you a good idea of the work that was ongoing at the state. Much more to come.
Thank you, Representative Marsh. And I think you're going to be probably sticking around for some of our breakouts and stuff, so people get to interact with you throughout the day. So we're going to move from state level to federal level and talk about a couple of things. I'm going to share my screen really quick so that we can get some slides, and that will be Mallory and I talking. Just to note, everyone will get these slides at following the webinar. So if I speak very quickly, you can have this information later and re-review it. So I wanted to touch a little bit on the ARPA Fund. So there are two different pots of money. There's the state and local fiscal recovery funds, and then there's the capital projects fund. So we'll just go through the state and local money. This is what a lot of folks receive direct allocations for, or will be getting an allocation for from DAS with their local money. So these funds were meant for broadband and water, wastewater infrastructure projects. Projects should establish or improve broadband service to unserved, underserved populations, to reach an adequate level of household work or attending school levels of broadband, so at least 25.3. And the key thing here is that these connections need to be reliable wireline connections. So the words reliable in the Treasury guidance kind of give local folks, a little bit of flexibility on where they're applying these funds. Is that service reliably like giving you 25.3? If not, you can build there, and that's an eligible project. Eligible projects, however, will need to have 100 and 100. So symmetrical 100 megabits per second of service, unless there are geography, topography, or excessive costs. Then those projects need to provide 120 service to that project, but they're really hoping that the projects can be 100, 100 or be scaled up to 100, 100 in the future. As Representative Marsh said, 25.3 standard right now is not necessarily the best standard, and we've kind of already surpassed that in need. So now it's looking at future standards, which is 100, 100. The Treasury rules also encourage broadband infrastructure projects that are a wireline connection, so fiber infrastructure. They suggest avoiding investing in locations with existing agreements to build, and then to focus projects on last mile connections and how to consider ways to integrate affordability programs into the design of your project. And then they are prioritizing, they want locals and states to prioritize support for broadband networks owned, operated, or affiliated with local governments, nonprofits, or cooperatives, because those providers have less pressure to turn profits. The last thing is the Treasury guidance doesn't really talk specifically about digital inclusion and digital equity. However, all of the rules are under a base level of that it should be addressing those who are facing negative economic impacts due to COVID. So an eligible use using that lens would be things like digital literacy or low-income programs for internet access. So that's the broader scope of the Treasury guidance. Let's see if I can actually work a computer this morning. The next thing, like I mentioned, there was a separate fund. It's $10 billion of capital projects funds. This is specifically for broadband and connectivity purposes. It's funding to states, territories, and tribal governments to carry out capital projects directly enabling work, education, and health monitoring and remote options in response to public health emergencies like COVID. And the focus of this is to leverage, to kind of complement the funds in the state and local fiscal recovery funds and provide a broader range of connectivity. So like Representative Marsh said, there was $120 million allocated from the state. They actually used the capital project funds to use that instead of the state and local recovery funds. If you read House Bill 5006, which you will get some resources with all of the bill numbers and some of those explanations later. Last thing I just wanted to touch on where there were two big federal programs that have kind of gone out, one for consumers and families and one for libraries and schools. So the emergency broadband benefit program, that's for individuals and families. It's a discount of up to $50 per month towards broadband services for eligible households. And then it also will provide a one-time discount for $100 to purchase a laptop, tablet, or any other device that streams broadband. The big part of how locals can help with this is if you're a provider of municipally owned or locally owned broadband, see if you can provide this benefit to folks, or do a lot of marketing in your community to let folks know that they could be eligible for the emergency broadband benefit with providers in your community. The other fund that I wanted to touch on is the Emergency Connectivity Fund. This is for libraries and schools. You have to be eligible for the FCC's E-rate program. You do not have to be an E-rate program provider right now. You just have to be eligible to qualify for that. It was $7.17 billion for the program. And this includes pretty much anything you can think of providing off-campus use for students, school staff, or library patrons. So hotspots, computers, modems, anything broadband related. In limited circumstances, it's the actual service, but that's really technical and you'd have to go back and read the program requirements for that. But hotspots, things like that for your library patrons, I wanted to note this in case your libraries are looking for a way to kind of help folks while they're still doing some things from home. The application filing window opened June 29th and it closes August 13th, 2021. So you still have time if your libraries and your communities want to apply for these funds and they are E-rate eligible. And now Mallory is going to give us a federal legislative update.
And I'll just really briefly, I think folks may have heard of in the past couple of weeks, there is a 20 members of the Senate that came together and created a bipartisan infrastructure framework. This is like a $1.2 trillion package. Details are still being worked out, but $65 billion of that package is for broadband. That number has come down from previous talks, but it's looking like that dollar amount probably will stand. We've heard, at the federal level talking about broadband as infrastructure. That's a big shift and a really important one. We know that a big goal in this bill is to make state and local direct investments. There is a sort of a procedural vote scheduled in the Senate on Wednesday. Like I said, the details of this bill haven't been written yet or made public. So that will be a procedural vote, but it will probably tell us a little bit more about the future of this bill. When talking to folks at the federal level, it sounds like, whether or not this big package makes it through the Senate, there will be also a budget reconciliation process that at least some of these funding packages can be built into if this framework and this bill doesn't get bipartisan support. We hopefully will know, though, within the next couple of months. So keep an eye out for that. And that's really all I had to say about that, Jenna. I think we can hand it back over to some presentations.
I was muted. I love virtual meetings. So next we're going to kind of hear from some folks about their regional barriers. And so we're going to start off with someone from Southern Oregon, Cave Junction's City Councilor Jeanne Miles. And she'll tell us what's going on in Southern Oregon and what they're facing. Jeanne, if you can unmute yourself, the floor is yours.
I'm unmuted.
Awesome.
Thank you. Jenna, one of our big issues is one, our topography or geography. We're in a valley, and we are also a very low economic area with a lot of immobile people. And so those are definitely barriers that we face. We have, our numbers are, you're talking about 25 and 25. We would love to have that. We have like 3 and 3. So on good days, we, so, you know, having people want to serve us is one of our huge barriers. And we have a hard time getting repeaters for our emergency services. So it's really basic stuff that are some of our barriers. So it's the idea of people don't want to come out and service us in the Illinois Valley, and you know, we're barely in Oregon, we're almost California, but we're a great location. And if we could get the service, it could really help our economy. But we can't get the service. So, and some mapping shows that there are squirrels somewhere in our mountains that are getting service. So it's like Representative Marsh said, we need accurate mapping. That's part of one of our barriers, is that somewhere it shows that we have service that we just don't have. That's a definite barrier.
Yeah, I think mapping is huge.
Yeah, so that helps.
I bet there's a lot of folks on this call who also feel like they would be happy to get just 25.3 right now.
Yes. I think you're right.
Anything else, Counselor?
Not that I can really think of. I'm sure as other people speak, it will definitely come to mind. I'll go, yeah, I should have said that. But right now, off the top of my head, those are the things that are most prevalent in my mind.
Awesome. Thank you for making time to speak today. And I will just kind of note for everyone in attendance before we move to our next speaker, this presentation right now is really just meant to set the stage. We're going to have a breakout room dedicated to barriers where we can kind of get further into the details and try to solve some of those things, or things kind of hear what has worked to solve some of those barriers. So the next person we have speaking is from the Metro region, and that's Hillsborough's Mayor Steve Calloway. So Mayor Calloway, the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, and I will start my timer. Thank you so much to the League of Oregon Cities and the AOC for the privilege of being with you today. And also thank you to Representative Marsh. You know, as I've heard you a number of different times, I'm just so grateful to have you as a champion in the legislature. Thank you for doing all of your work. And if there are questions from attendees, we have a couple of just remarkable individuals from Hillsborough who are participating, and that's Greg Mott and Brad Nosler, who are overseeing and our highlight program, and they'll put their contact information in the chat room. And if you have subsequent questions or seek additional information, they will make sure that that will help you get accurate information from them. So, you know, as we look at the barriers, you know, there's a variety of different barriers, and obviously cost, you know, from the city perspective is one of them. So we're using our general fund for this, as well as some of our ARPA dollars that we'll be receiving in the next 2 years. We've dedicated about $2 to $3 million in ARPA funds. And out of our general fund, we've dedicated about $4 million a year for 7 years. And that allows us to do this in a kind of rolling phase deployment, if you will. So we're not, front loading it, and borrowing money. We're doing this as a pay as you go. And then also we received some money from the Hillsborough School District, because when they passed a bond, and part of it was for technology upgrades, they asked us to become their internet service provider. So we have done that. And so we've even taken, then that means the infrastructure and our system outside of Hillsborough into the city of North Plains, where there's 2 elementary schools, into Cornelius, where we have a school, as well as parts of unincorporated Washington County. So we are the internet service provider for all of Hillsborough School District. And that is really exciting for us to be able to partner with them, and in the process save the school district quite a bit of money on an annual basis. So from the consumer perspective, one of the barriers can be cost. And so that's why we have made it very affordable for low income. And it's basically just $10 a month. And we provide the hardware that's needed. And so it truly is nothing hidden. It is just $10, and it's a 1 gig speed, no data caps, obviously all net neutral. And so we are here to provide this utility. And sometimes people think, well, you're not a cable provider. How do we know you're going to do well with this? And we remind them, we already provide a utility, one of the most important utilities that they use, and that's water. And we also are responsible for other systems, in the infrastructure, whether it be roads and things such as that. So we have a lot of experience, and we have a lot of trust, with our residents. And so, when they understand that, then they can see us and understand how we are able to provide that in a safe and reliable way. And so, in the last year with the pandemic, it's even driven that point home more than ever. One of the things with our businesses, our cost of service is, I think it's about $75 for 500 megs, or it's north of that for the full gigabit service. And so one of the challenges, one of the barriers we have with some of our businesses is, if you are renting or leasing a building, then sometimes switching over to a new cable provider is a little bit more complicated, because you're going through your landlord or the building owner. And sometimes there's the need to retain traditional voice services, in addition to your broadband. So we do provide, those services as well. And in some areas, there are some constraints on speed. And so while things may work for residential, it may not work for business. So, we're listening, we're reaching out to really hear what are the things that, our customers and potential customers are concerned with, because if it's predictable, it's preventable. So in that two-way, in that outreach, then we're able to make sure that we're meeting the needs. Now, one of the things that we did do with our residential is we identified our least connected parts of our community. And in one of our census tracts, we have identified, the south central part of Hillsborough. So that's why we made that a priority for us, not because it's, the wealthier part of Hillsborough, but because it's the least connected part of Hillsborough. And that reflects our commitment to, equity. It makes sure that we are consistent with our efforts in giving everybody just opportunities for, frankly, to reach their dreams and just to have access to good education, good economic development, and anything else along those lines. So my 5 minutes is up. Thank you, Jenna. This has been great. And I'm sorry that I just was able to scratch the surface, but I'm more than happy, as is Greg or Brad, to follow up with anybody in any way that we can.
Thank you, Mayor. So Highlight is pretty cool. It's very cool that the city of Hillsborough is creating that. And I think something that I got from your quick presentation, Mayor, is that you guys were trying to meet some of the affordability needs for businesses and individuals in your community, and really prioritize those places where there might not be affordability in the market in the metro area. though we know you guys have service, there's lots of options there. So now kind of switching to another region, we're going to go to Eastern Oregon, and we're going to hear from Mark Bennett, who is the Baker County Commissioner and the Unity City Administrator. So he wears two hats, and he can kind of share with us what he's seeing in kind of both of his roles. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jenna, and also thanks especially to both the League and to the AOC for putting this on. We've been talking about it as staff and commissioners because I guess the very first thing is we absolutely have no idea. I was listening to Representative Marsh, who I've been on the Wildfire Council with, and she's talking about 25 bits, and then all of a sudden you were talking about 100 bits / 100. And I actually sent a chat going, I have no idea what you're even talking about. And I think that's our basic issue. We have some areas of Baker County, which is, as the other counselor mentioned, we're geographically spread out, that the small rural phone companies have provided fiber. Actually, I live in Unity, or in outskirts of Unity, and I have fiber to my barn, to my shop, to various places. And yet in Baker Valley, we have in a poll, we have a lot of folks that some are still on dial-up, and others that are using hotspots and have less than 10. So we're out here really not knowing where to even start. We have, we don't understand about franchises because counties don't do franchises. And so we're not sure how that works. I guess, one of the biggest things is that, what about competition? Because we have CenturyLink, we have Verizon, all of these other groups, how to sort this out. We don't want to miss this opportunity by having extensive studies and extensive reviews. And first of all, as all of us in government knows, you hire a consultant, but you really need to know something about it yourself or have somebody to help you, because all of us, when we look in our office, has at least one or two giant projects that the consultant just cut and pasted from somewhere else. I still have one on a zoning ordinance where they were talking about tide pool gates. And if Baker County has problems with tide pool, that's going to be a real problem for Oregon. So trying to sort all of this out. A lot of our rural providers, we have no competition. And so they've put a caveat that if you want the service, that you have to also subscribe to phone service, and that's $30 a month, even though you may have cellular service or you might voice over internet. So, this really is extremely impactful to our rural folks that are on limited incomes. We experienced nothing but grief. Matter of fact, the county purchased a number of hotspots to try to help the school children when they were doing distance learning. So that's kind of a quick, dirty summary, I guess, from our observation here. The biggest thing that I believe that the League and both AOC could help us is to getting somebody to bring them on board that in a really timely fashion could put together an analysis, put together options so that we could continue to move forward. So thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Mallory. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett, for joining us and for sharing. I think what you described is really what inspired us to start this conversation today. So thank you for sharing, and I hope we can start to answer some of those questions. Next up, coming to us from the beautiful Oregon coast, is Commissioner David Yamamoto. I think I saw you, Commissioner.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mallory and Jenna, for putting this on. League of Oregon Cities and Association of Oregon Counties. This is a discussion that really does need to take place. So that's perfect. I am very grateful to have been appointed to OBAC, Oregon Broadband Advisory Council, where Representative Marsh and Chair Joseph Rennell and Business Oregon staff Daniel Holbrook are just doing a terrific job. There's so much to be done, and I've learned so much there. Tillamook County, when the pandemic first hit, Tillamook County ran into several problems with our school districts and distance learning. We were very fortunate to receive a grant from Business Oregon for $349,000 roughly to help provide broadband internet to school children that really were not able to do their schoolwork because they did not have appropriate internet access. One thing that we learned from that is when you're doing infrastructure, infrastructure is always going to take much longer than you think it's going to take. So that's one of the issues that we've learned. It is my dream that we bring fiber to the home throughout Tillamook County. Tillamook County is a large county. We've got 80 miles of coastline. We've got broad river valleys going up into canyons, which are going to be almost impossible to hook up to individual families up in these canyon areas. But it's something that we really need to do. As far as an economic development tool, broadband is absolutely that. In Tillamook County, our beautiful coastal cities, our second home and vacation rental, the number of vacation rentals and second homes that we have is tremendous. And that creates a huge housing problem for the local residents, people that want to move here, live here and work here. And it's a huge problem. One of the things we're finding is that if we end with the pandemic and everyone attending meetings virtually, people now from across Oregon, across the Northwest, can really live wherever they want and continue to work and do their work virtually if they have appropriate internet access. And again, that's not the 25.3. You really need gigabit service, gigabit synchronous service, uploads and downloads. And that's where we really do want to get. We're very fortunate, I think. Over 20 years ago, Tillamook County created an intergovernmental agency called Tillamook Lightwave. We were looking to make sure that county offices and the hospital and doctors' offices and libraries and schools had true high-speed internet. So over 20 years ago, we developed an IGA, which includes Tillamook County, our local PUD, and the Port of Tillamook Bay. And we just started rolling out fiber all across Tillamook County to make sure that everyone that needed high-speed internet had access to that. And we've been very successful in that. Along the coast, I like to say that, and I'm sure this is true, when it comes to fiber backbone, of all the coastal counties in Oregon, Tillamook County probably has the most robust fiber backbone of any coastal county, but we still have a long ways to go. We have gaps in our fiber backbone. We have not brought fiber to the home, which is our next goal. So we've been working with two BATs, broadband action teams. The Northwest, we are part of the Northwest BAT, broadband action team, which includes Tillamook County, Clatsop County, Columbia County, and the western part of Washington County. And it is our dream that we can utilize what Tillamook County already has as a fiber backbone and run it north from Tillamook County into Clatsop County, east into Columbia County, and back into Hillsborough. And that would give us several asynchronous rings, which would be perfect. We're also starting to have conversations with the Central Coast BAT, which includes Lincoln County, Benton County, Lane County, and Lynn County. And we want to do the same thing there. We just feel it makes the most sense. Run our fiber backbone through Lincoln County into Lane and Benton and Lynn County. And again, get all of those rings put together so that if one portion of the line goes down, everyone does not lose internet. One of the great things about that too, developing these partnerships with other BATs. Now we've got 8 coastal and inland counties. If we can all work together, I feel that's going to give our area really an extra push when it comes to looking for funding out of the state and federal governments, because we're covering such a large population of people in Northwest Oregon. And I think that would be absolutely terrific. One other thing I want to mention is that Tillamook Creamery Association is here in Tillamook County, and they have gone to the extent that they are providing 2 fellowships through Lead for America to Oregon. One of those fellowships is going to be right here in Tillman County. The other fellowship is going to be in Morrow County. These are 2-year fellowships. Their sole purpose in life is to help these counties bring high-speed internet to those counties. I've already had conversations with the Creamery, and they don't mind at all that we utilize our fellow to work with both BATs, both the Northwest BAT and the Central Coast BAT, so that we all know what everyone is doing. And this is an area where I think that just bring everyone together. So there's just a lot going on. There's so much to be done, but this is a very opportune time in our history where the money's going to be available. I think the will is there. Everyone realizes that broadband is an extremely important part of life today. You can't do without high-speed internet. So that's the story that I want to tell. And I'm looking forward to working with everyone, especially since I am the county commission representative on OBAC, the Oregon Broadband Advisory Council. If anyone needs any assistance, just give me a buzz. I'd be more than willing to help anybody that in any way that I can. So Mallory and Jenna, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Commissioner Yamamoto. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and for your service on OBAC. Last, coming to us from Central Oregon, Deschutes County Commissioner Tony DeBone is going to talk to us a little bit about what broadband looks like in his neighborhoods.
According to my agenda, there's another Valley line item in there. Maybe is there somebody else, but I will speak now. So this is Commissioner DeBone from Deschutes County. I've got a bunch of Post-it notes. I'll kind of go down here. So thank you very much for having me today. There's definitely opportunity here. One of the things I think of is 15 and 17 years ago, it was dial-up. It was AOL. You had a 56K modem and you couldn't even get that kind of speed on your phone system. So we're past that now. When we talk about 25 down and 3 up, that empowers us to watch multiple Netflix streams in our home. You know, that was a moment in time too, 2 video streams in your home. And now we're talking about symmetrical 100 megabits, and that is the Zoom opportunity we have here. So I can see the evolution of what we're talking about, the different speed levels. One of the things you hear about is passive optical network, and that's the fiber optic lines that can be branched off like 128 customers at a time. So that's the fiber optics that you can put on the utility lines or underground in some communities. So in Deschutes County, but also Tri-County, Jefferson and Crook, we're going to use our Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. CEDS is a kind of a official acronym that we utilize, and do a needs analysis. A couple months ago, I contacted Dan Holbrook from the Oregon Broadband office, and he mentioned, oh, what's the current needs analysis? And I said, I don't know, let's find out. So COIC is our Intergovernmental Council, and we don't really have a current needs analysis. So that's an effort that needs to be done here. But we also do have multiple competing private companies, which is wonderful. We do have competition in the market here in Central Oregon, and some known areas that don't have the capacity for that connection at the residences. And it's mostly in the rural. When we think of Deschutes County, it's Bend, Redmond, Sisters, and LaPine, but also destination resorts in some rural communities. So finding out where we don't have that basic infrastructure, because once you get a fiber optic line out to an area, you can really put all kinds of bandwidth out there in any of those fiber optic lines. So one of the items that we can work at the state and the federal level is kind of breaking into some of those dark fiber loops that are around. And we do have huge bandwidth and redundant bandwidth, and companies that provide that base service to all the different providers. But there may be some opportunities to find some dark fiber lines that are in the ground, put in 20 years ago, and branch off. So that's a real great effort around here. I do think in Central Oregon, it's going to be local companies. I already heard the concept of franchises. At Deschutes County, we have an ambulance service area, which is the franchise of. We also have solid waste, the franchise haulers of solid waste. So maybe there is franchise opportunities. The broadband action team, the BAT, that's a good terminology I hadn't heard before, but maybe that's our, the brand name of what we're going to be doing here. Another interesting thing, I spoke to some providers recently, said this is basically the second bandwidth revolution in 10 years. as I say, going from 25.3 as a goal to 100 as a goal has come on quick. And technology moves at light speed, obviously. So aiming for that symmetrical 100 is the second time we're really trying to just do these huge jumps in bandwidth in the 10-year period. So we need to put that in perspective. We have some rural areas that are even just close to downtown Bend that don't have good bandwidth. And, there's all kinds of people, poor and wealthy living in some rural areas that don't have that bandwidth that you'd expect in our community. So there's some huge opportunities to be able to do those investments. I know that just recently, in the last 10 years, it was always schools, libraries, and medical to get the bandwidth between point A and point B. And now we're trying to do it to everybody's house. So I think that's what I have today. Really want to support the local companies to be able to get that last mile to people's homes. We're going to have to do some analysis and make sure it's fair in the market. But yeah, let's move forward. A lot of dollars to be invested currently. Thank you very, very much for having this this whole effort, being able to share with people around the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thanks to all who shared a little bit about what's going on in their region. Jenna, jump in if I'm wrong, but I think we'll take just a couple-minute break here and come back at 10. And we're going to come back and go straight into breakout room discussions where we'll have a chance to dig in a little bit deeper to barriers that folks are seeing in their communities and some ideas on how to bridge those gaps.
Yep, that's what we are doing. And so yeah, feel free to take a quick bio break. When you do come back and we put you into breakout rooms, you will have to hit a button that you'll get a notification that pops up on your screen that says the host has assigned you a breakout room. You have to say, I'm going to go into that breakout room. So there will be something that you have to do to enter the breakout rooms. Julie from LOC will be in the
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had fruitful conversations in your breakouts. I'm not seeing Jenna back yet.
I'm here, Mallory.
You are, okay.
Yeah.
There you are.
But yeah, so I hope everyone shared. Hopefully that was conducive to learning. One thing I mentioned in my breakout room was just no question is too small. So if you need a level set or just a basic question, throw it in the chat. We will probably be able to answer it, or we'll try to get some answers to you after this webinar. Because I know everyone's at different places. And so having one of these, people are throwing out just terms all over the place. And it's easy to be like, what does that mean? And I don't want everyone to feel pressured that they have to go with a Google Chrome tab up next to them and Google all of the words that we're throwing out. So please utilize the chat function. We're going to jump into a couple more presentations. We're going to first hear from the Broadband office with Daniel Holbrook, then we'll hear from USDA, and then we will hear from the city manager of John Day later on, who will kind of walk us through how to navigate the system of all this money that's out there, because I know their city has done it. But first, to level set all of that, we'll start with Business Oregon, and then we will go further on through USDA, since they have a lot of funding opportunities as well. So Daniel, go ahead, unmute yourself, and your slides should be up, unless you were sharing your own screen, and I can take mine off.
I was sharing my own screen, but either way, it's all good.
How about you run your slide deck?
Sounds awesome. Thank you, Jenna. So first off, just thank you for organizing this. I do appreciate the time and the space that everyone's made. My name is Daniel Holbrook, and I am the broadband manager. I'm for the Oregon Broadband office. And for those of you who don't know, that's in Business Oregon, which is the state's economic development department. We and our mission at Business Oregon is we invest in Oregon businesses, communities, and people to promote a globally competitive, diverse, and inclusive economy. So that's kind of why and what we do. And that's our bread and butter and our blood. purpose of this slide, just really building on what Representative Marsh spoke about, is there's been bodies of work that's been done really to address the policy side of where the state wants to go with broadband, as well as funding. So key thing is research has been done, policy advocacy, and really setting the stage ultimately for implementation. On the strategy side, knowing that bodies of work has been done, the two images that you see on the left, the portal, the map, data, study, plans, we have those things. And important thing is that you don't just do it once. So you do have to check and make sure that you're making progress. So last year, a whole number of reports and plans were issued, as well as the map that I posted in the chat. That was recently updated back in March. But really going to how do you try to make change with the challenges across the state? It's not just having a map, you got to do something with it. And ultimately, that's really about having funding, having programs, and then calling for projects to address that challenge. And so the three programs that the business organ for the Broadband Office Strategic Plan calls out for is for a rural capacity program, for a literacy, security, and inclusion program, and for an outreach. And so, those will start to go together a little bit, but ultimately we have to have people to make sure that this runs. And so, fingers crossed that, the budget gets signed and there'll be 4 additional FTEs to help me throughout the rest of this plan. So I included this. This comes from the federal government. This is Broadband USA, and this actually is available for every county across the state. And this is the 2020 Federal Broadband Community Report, and it gives a snapshot just of everything from population to how many people have internet subscriptions, what are those percentages, those data points that we want, as well as the cost and how many devices that we have. So this is really pairing a lot of that American Community Survey information, as well as other what we call Form 477 data, utilizes UCLA data. And so there's a number of different data sets that they use at a statewide level. So this information is out there. So if you don't have any information about your county, know that there's at least this level of info. So this map, and everyone says, well, where do we have the need? And I can say there's needs across the entire state, but pretty much if you see the areas that are in blue, those are the areas that are doing pretty well. They either have basic or they have future ready broadband. So just thinking of 25.3 and up are the blue areas, and everywhere else, the answer is they don't have that. Some areas just don't even have connection possibilities as well. And to give you a sense, we talked about the data and some of the challenges that we have, really quantifying what those needs are and the differences range anywhere from 5% to 10% to 16% of Oregonians don't have access to broadband. So that's phenomenal, but the spread of that data and the resource and the research is phenomenal in itself. So we had that map published in 2020, and then in the summer of 2020, thanks to the Emergency Board, the 2020 CARES Act funding allocated $10 million for broadband projects. Business Oregon launched the Rural Broadband Capacity Program and issued a request for applications for infrastructure construction and emergency response projects to provide increased broadband capacity and internet access for telework, telehealth, and K-12 distance learning. On July 2nd, 2020, 9 business days later, we received over 100 applications for grant requests totaling $50 million. And then a couple of weeks after that, 10 million in grants for 28 projects across 24 counties were issued, and they went to cities, counties, tribes, cooperatives, school districts, private sector internet service providers. And so this map just gives a sense of which counties received funding. Carrying on into this year, in March, we issued a request for information, really wanting to have an understanding of what projects are available to be constructed over the next 2 years, really because we were having that budgetary discussion. And so I wanted to say, where are they? What does it look like? And what was phenomenal, and this was a short turnaround as well, about 2.5 weeks, we heard of a total number of 78 projects, and that is $500 million worth of projects. But part of that is that there was a need for $345 million from either state or federal to provide grants. And we also heard about 32 communities that needed technical assistance. So that's saying there's a huge need. And one of the things that we know from our 2020 study is the cost to provide broadband connection to Oregonians is $1.3 billion. So again, this $500 million is not even getting to the halfway mark. So that was in March. Then last month, NTIA, which is a federal agency, they issued a broadband infrastructure program. And so we put out a call because the state was one of those eligible entities. And so we put out a call for partnerships. Basically, do you have projects, you want to do something? And so if you look at the stars, we had 12 responses, and there was over $90 million of identified projects. And so since this was highly competitive, we ended up selecting 4 of those applicants. And so we're working on our application, and our goal is to submit that within the next 2 weeks. So not going to go into a lot of these because federal funding has already been announced, and there's been some discussion about that, but I will call out 2 things. One, the NTIA broadband infrastructure program that I just mentioned. If you are a city or a county, you can also make application if you have a project ready and if you feel that it meets the criteria of that program. The second thing is Business Oregon has CDBG for the non-entitlement communities, and the COVID-19 Impact Assistance Program does provide funding for technical assistance and for planning. So if you have, if you already know what that looks like for you and you're ready to take that step, I would say that, first thing you need to do is contact your Business Oregon Regional Development Officer. And just so you know, we actually have 3 on this call. So I know Brian, Allison, and I think Colin are on. If you don't know who yours is, we can get that information to you, and I can drop a link in there. And then other stuff, so to be determined on some of those guidance. Regarding the 2021 legislative session, I will say that we have the Oregon Broadband Advisory Council meeting on Thursday. So there's a link in this presentation if you want to join us. It's a public meeting. We'll be going a little bit deeper dive into bill reviews as well as funding and what those next steps and that time for implementation and what it looks like today. There is a series of work before we can say, we have funding available. So I would say if you don't have your project scoped, you're not quite ready, that's okay. It's going to take all of us a little bit of time. And for those of you who want more information, we have 2 events that are going to be coming up. One in September, there's a virtual event, and that's the Oregon Infrastructure Summit. Website's there, the OregonSummit.com. And then in October, it's going to be an in-person meeting in Ashland, and that's the Oregon Connections, so OregonConnections.info. So take a look. If that meets your needs and you're interested, please attend those events. And ultimately, I just want to thank everyone for being here and taking the time to, have the discussions and to learn and to share and really to start to work on your broadband strategy and implement some of those. So, I thank our partners, and, definitely, one of the things I just want to share is, your internet service providers, those that are in your area, they're some of the ones that provide the most funding for broadband. So make sure you always have that communication. And then obviously the feds and then the state. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. That was a great overview. And thank you again so much for sticking with us today and leading our breakout rooms too. Next we have from the USDA, John Holman. John, do you have slides? How can I help? Oh, there you go. Jenna's going to run them for you, it looks like. I'll hand it over.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mallory. On behalf of USDA, I'd like to thank the Association of Oregon Counties for having us do a quick presentation on some of the federal programs that are offered through the USDA Rural Utility Service. My name is John Holman. I'm the General Field Rep. I cover the states of Oregon and Washington for our telecom programs. We also have with us Tim O'Connell. He's a Western Regional Coordinator. And with that, if you can go to the next slide, I will have Tim give a little bit of overview from Rural Development, who has a suite of different programs for economic development. Tim, are you there?
Yes, John, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Great, appreciate it. Thanks everybody for having me on today, and I appreciate John having the opportunity to provide a little bit of background on USDA Rural Development. We're a funding agency, between the 5th and the 13th largest bank in the US, if you put our portfolio up. We provide loans primarily, but we also have grants and loan guarantees in many areas, primarily housing, economic development, healthcare, first responder services, equipment, and water, electric, and telecommunications infrastructure. So we're basically an infrastructure financing program, and of course, broadband and is one of the main ones these days. Next slide, if you could, please. The way we deliver our programs is we have three main branches: rural utilities, which John works for, the Rural Housing Service, which covers our housing and our what I call our nonprofit financing program, and also our Rural Business Cooperative Service, which houses our business programs, loan guarantees for businesses, small grant programs for value added, and others. And I work for the Innovation Center, and that's actually not on the chart, but the Innovation Center was started about 4 years ago. It's kind of the link between the three agencies there: housing, utilities, and rural business services. So as internally, we could deliver a more holistic program to our external customers out in rural areas. And so I work myself across the three agencies in partnership across the 13 Western states, including Oregon, in developing the partnerships with federal, state, and local partners in delivering our 40+ programs that we have. We are administered, some of our programs are administered out of our national office. Some are administered out of our state office. And for Oregon, our state office is in Portland. We do have area offices as well throughout the state. And our state offices are generally given leadership through an appointed state director. And we don't have a new one yet under this administration, but we do have Jill Reese is our acting state director. And if you have any information on specific state programs, you can reach out to her or through John and I. So with that, I'm going to let John actually cover the bread and butter of this program, which is the funding programs that he administers on broadband through USDA Rural Development Rural Utilities. So John, take it from here.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. There's a lot of federal programs out there, and Tim's a great point of contact for navigating all those federal programs. If you can go to the next slide, please. So just give you a brief history. Rural Utility Service has been around for a while. We had the Rural Electrification Act, of course. We've had a couple of programs around since the 1940s that were used to get telephone to our rural communities. Over the past 10 years or so, our agency has provided about $8 billion in loans and grants for broadband infrastructure. Next slide, please. To give you an overview, we have 4 core programs with the Rural Utility Service. One is our telecommunication infrastructure loan program. That's a program that's designed for telephone companies, incumbent local exchange carriers, to get loans at the cost of money to build out broadband. All of these programs are for the actual infrastructure themselves. We have a Community Connect grant program. It's a small true grant program for a project of $3 million or less to expand broadband to our rural communities. And then we have a Reconnect program, which most of you probably heard about. It's a pilot program that's currently been written into regulation. And we have some funding opportunity available through the Reconnect program. Next slide, please. So on the infrastructure loan program, there are some benefits to getting a loan from our agency. We can defer the payments so that you can get the project built out and start generating revenue to meet expenses. The interest rates are extremely low, 2% or below. and we can extend the loan maturity out. We can work with you through the entire request for an application. Funding is currently available, about $690 million every fiscal year. We don't come close to spending those dollars. So if you're interested in a loan, feel free to reach out to us to discuss that. Next slide, please. So we have another grant program. It's our Distance Learning and Telemedicine Grant Program. It's a grant up to $1 million per project to do just those things. It's mostly for equipment, a number of software, perhaps related items for the real-time interactive delivery of telecommunications or distance learning. The program's received quite a bit of interest over the past funding rounds, but we do have some future funding that's coming available for the program. So if you are in the communities and you hear distance learning or telemedicine, we have a grant for it. Next slide, please. Just to give you some ideas regards to the investments in the state of Oregon. Historically, over the since 2010, about 74 million out of our national competition of funds have gone to Oregon. We've done some activity in the infrastructure loan program. Reconnect program is there, about 6 million. Look for that number to significantly increase. We're starting to get some successes with these programs in Oregon. Distance learning telemedicine, 3.6 million. We haven't funded a Community Connect grant, which is a small grant program in Oregon, but that's about to change. Just to give you some idea, about 74 million for all projects in Oregon rural residents. Next slide, please. All state investments throughout the entire country, about 8 billion since 2010. So that kind of gives you some sense as to the size of our agency for telecommunications. Next slide, please. So we do provide some funding for tribal investments. We do have priority point selections for future funding rounds for anything tribal related. So we do make a special emphasis to work with our tribal communities to make sure that they have the opportunity to come in for funding for expanding broadband service. Next slide, please. And here is both of our contact information. The applicants to our program are pretty broad in scope, as long as there is some owning and operating and maintaining requirements around the broadband networks and a lot of relationships, but it could be counties, cities, nonprofits. So if you have a potential project in mind for the infrastructure that needs funding, we'd like to hear from you. It's always good to get into conversations early as your project timeline hopefully aligns with funding opportunity from our programs. Feel free to reach out to both of us and we can have that conversation to see about what program you need to be focusing on. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mallory. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thanks for joining us. There's a couple of questions for you both in the chat, if maybe you could address them there. And our next presentation is from John Day City Manager Nick Green, who's going to talk to us about the partnership between John Day and Grant County.
And I'll also just add to that, that Nick Green has been navigating the system of USDA and Business Oregon and the state legislature for a while now. And so he'll probably give us some good tips and tricks. Nick, the floor is yours, and I will share my screen with your slides.
Great. Thank you, guys. Appreciate the opportunity to come and join with you today. I'll give a brief overview of what we've done out here in Grant County, and this is really more from a practitioner standpoint of how to work effectively with the state and federal agencies that are funding and permitting these projects. So if you'll jump to the next slide. First money in is always the hardest. It's tough to get that first win, but it's I won't say easy, but certainly easier to build on that. And so we started lobbying in 2017 to address broadband gaps and inequities in our county. We were fortunate to receive a state appropriation of about 1.8 million. And that was to build some middle mile infrastructure between Grant and Harney counties, along a path where we not only didn't have broadband, we didn't even have cell phone coverage. We still have 3 communities that don't have cell phone coverage in Grant County in 2021. So obviously a lot of gaps that needed to be addressed. Those funds were received in December of 2017. So we've had funding for broadband at the local level for about 3.5 years. If you'll go to the next slide, this is why we need it. So it's interesting, we're not talking about broadband, we're talking about the economy. Grant County's population has basically been in free fall since the timber wars, and we are down to the population we had in 1970. There are probably a lot of great things about net zero, but net zero for population growth is not so great unless you're a really affluent retirement community, which we definitely are not. Our funding is derived largely from state shared revenue, which is distributed on a per capita basis. So as we lose people, we lose resources. So we said we've got to stop the bleeding and get back to a sustainable economy and a sustainable growth rate. We've got to recover about 1,000 residents that have left Grant County just to get back to where we were in the late 80s and early 90s, and then achieve a sustainable growth rate from there. And so broadband's a key part of that. That's really why we did this. If you go to the next slide, we took the approach of organizing an intergovernmental agency just to allow our affected communities to work together in a more formal way. So that was founded in the spring of 2018. There's a formal process to organize an ORS 190. And its members are Grant County Court, the City of John Day, and the City of Seneca. We also have 2 at-large board members who are appointed by the board members for each of those communities. And so we have a board member from Long Creek and another one from John Day. I was appointed as the executive director in August of 2018 because I work for free. So the price was right. I've been doing this for about 2.5 years now. Go to the next slide. Here's really an interesting snapshot. This is the Digital Divide Index scores that came out a couple of years ago. I think this is 2018 data, but it shows the winners and losers, I guess, in the current broadband spectrum and the gaps that we're trying to close. So Grant, Harney, Wheeler, Sherman, these lots of federal and state lands. I think we have 4 or 5 national forests surrounding John Day. If you look at that broader region, and about 2 million acres of public lands that you have to navigate to get fiber in and out of the county. So these are low density areas that have really fallen back on broadband access, and not just access to the internet, but also other aspects that feed that DDI index. Just kind of shows you a snapshot of where we're at and what we're trying to overcome. If you go to the next slide. So we organized the coalition. We lined out professional services agreements with various consulting firms to help us design and plan our broadband network. And then we started establishing partnerships with local agencies. So we have joint use license agreements with our power company to co-locate fiber on their poles, and also with CenturyLink to co-locate fiber on their poles. And we started identifying additional funding sources to close these gaps, while also doing construction. So we started creating points of presence in John Day and Seneca that would serve as co-location facilities where we could branch out from there to these other communities. If you go to the next slide, that was some of the early work. We put together what I thought was a very competitive consulting team, Comstructure Consulting, which was our broadband engineers, CTC Technology and Energy. They're actually out of Maryland, but they have done a lot of work with USDA and helped us with some fundraising. The Fiber Channels helping us navigate the dark fiber acquisition market and help us with pricing strategies. And then the Cohen Law Group out of Pittsburgh, which specializes in municipal broadband. In fact, that's exclusively their practice area. So we worked with those groups. They became part of our team. If you go to the next slide. We also formed partnerships with our local internet service providers, signed non-disclosure agreements that would allow us to negotiate with them, and ultimately signed an MOU with our one fiber optic provider that would allow us to jointly finance, acquire, and manage some of these assets. So we took a public-private partnership approach where the public agency is providing financing, assistance with permitting, and application support, and essentially creating dark fiber assets that could be managed by a private internet service provider that specializes in the customer relationships and all of the outside plant and equipment maintenance that we really weren't set up for. If you go to the next slide, this is some of our current work. So we've got the 2 co-location facilities, one in John Day and one in Seneca. We actually moved our 911 center into one of those because it has the best fiber optic access in the county now. And we've been able to expand from those hubs. So we now have fiber to Seneca School in Seneca. We have it to all of the critical community facilities in John Day, except for the county court and the airport. And we have planned network expansions to those regions, as well as future industrial areas for the city. And that's through an EDA grant that we've applied for. And I think that's maybe on the next slide. Nope, but we will get there, I promise. If you go to the next slide, it shows John Day as a region adjacent to Canyon City. Some of the policy things that are a bit challenging, if you have fiber anywhere in your census block, you're essentially excluded from most federal funding sources. So it doesn't really help you close those last mile gaps unless there have been policy changes in the last year or two. Census blocks don't work well for rural communities because the blocks are so large. But we were able to work with EDA to identify that last mile solution. And if you go to the next slide, so this is what that's going to look like. We've gotten a letter of further consideration. We're going through the last stages of the environmental permitting now, and this will build out our local broadband network to every neighborhood that lacks it. So most of this is done in city right-of-way or on land that's already been acquired by the city of John Day. But this will connect all of our existing neighborhoods as well as our commercial and industrial areas. And then the private ISP that manages the network can do the drops to the customer from these backbones. And so what you're seeing here is about a $2 million build to complete fiber to the premise within the city limits. If you go to the next slide. We learned by doing, and we learned the hard way on a couple of these builds. But what we've refined now is what I'm calling our 10-step design build process. This is the approach we take to do all of our local build outs. So we do a preliminary route planning. We have our engineers create an opinion of probable cost. Usually they're fairly accurate, but we always leave about a 20% margin of error based on materials and labor. Once we have those things and we know we can fund the project, we go out and do the field surveying, which includes all the co-location points. Everywhere we're going to have to put fiber, whether it's aerial or underground. And after doing that, we apply for permits and they develop a construction drawing set, which looks like the sheet on the right. It's basically the documents that we'll go out to bid for. We'll request proposals or quotes depending on the value of the project, go through our procurement process to do evaluations and awards, award a contract for construction. After it's built and we have our engineers overseeing the build, they'll do the verification and acceptance testing, make sure all the lines are working the way we want them to. And then we contract for operations and maintenance. The total number of employees employed by Grant County Digital is exactly 1, myself. And as I mentioned, I don't get money. This is an additional duty as assigned. So we kept our approach very lean because we wanted all of our funding to go into construction. So this is the 10-step process we use to get stuff done. And using that approach, we've been able to build several networks within the city limits of both John Day and Seneca. If you go to the next slide, I think it shows current funding. So we've got $400,000 devoted to current assets, including fiber in those outside plant facilities and our co-location facilities. We have committed $1 million from our state money as match on OTC's application to USDA. So they want a reconnect grant for $6 million. We put up the match for that. That will extend fiber from John Day and Mount Vernon up to the northwest areas of the county, Long Creek, Monument, and Spray, and south to Seneca. So once that is completed and it's now fully funded, we will have fiber to every city in the county where we currently lack it. And then we took $200,000 again of the state appropriation and pledged that as match on our EDA grant, which we are in pre-award for $1.8 million. That also includes what we're calling the cyber mill, which is a co-location point, as well as an internet access point. So a lot of leverage with the EDA award. Once that's granted, we will have taken a $1.8 million appropriation from the state and turned it into $10 million in total project investment in about a 3-year period, which is the kind of leverage rate we're looking for as we work with the state and federal partners. If you go to the next slide, this just shows some of the area challenges that we're trying to overcome. So long haul carriers, if you have one running through your community, and in our region, they go along Highway 20, up I-84 and back down 97. They do not come through Grant County or Wheeler County, which is part of what contributes to that digital divide. We're just a long way from the dark fiber long haul providers. And so we're trying to complete networks to get to them so that we have redundant access both to the east, to the northwest, and to the south. We use Fiber Locator to map those networks. And then if you go to the next slide, same tool, this is Fiber Locator showing a snapshot of our local internet service provider OTC connections. Existing is in blue, and the planned network under USDA Reconnect is shown in green. And as you can see, that will cover pathways out of Grant County in multiple directions. If you go to the next slide, I think this might be my get off the stage slide. Just ongoing challenges, so you're aware of what you're getting into if you're gonna tread into this. Middle mile and last mile infrastructure, they're tough nuts to crack. Don't go it alone. It's just too complex, it's too expensive to try and have one county or one municipality take this on. You've got to develop partnership agreements, whether that's with other cities and counties or with the private sector, and certainly with the state and federal agencies. Very exciting to see money moving at the scale it is today. We've had funding challenges. We were competing at a time where broadband was of interest, but was not being funded like it is right now. And then geography matters. Metrics about cost per mile of fiber are really meaningless out here until you go out to bid, because you've got a lot of elevation and you've got federal and state lands, you've got rocky terrain. So geography certainly is going to affect your price to build. And keeping incentives aligned, especially if you're in a rural or frontier area where you have a very small addressable market. It's important to recognize the constraints of the private sector and what will keep them interested in your market. If you try to overcompete it, you're going to lose your providers. If you undercompete it, you're going to create local monopolies. So it's definitely a balancing act to try to find the sweet spot where everyone feels like they're being incentivized to play nice. And communications with the public. People are crazy, as we all know. You love them, but they're tough. And so you've got to communicate extensively with the public so they understand why this is so important. We keep tying it back to our population decline. We've got to get people back. That means leveling the economic playing field. And for us, that means giving active retirees and digital commuters the opportunity to work from our community. So to the extent that we've been able to do that, I'll just leave you with a bit of good news. Through this and several other mechanisms the city is pursuing, including housing incentives, in 2020, John Day grew for the first time in 22 years through non-annexation related growth. So the strategy we're taking is working, and we are starting to see the fruits of our labor. Having redundant, you can go to the next slide if you'd like. Having redundant communications is essential. I probably don't have to convince anyone of that on this call. Having access to grant funds is essential. But we've also learned that syndicating the investment risk and will reduce your operating risk and allow you to achieve your mission faster than trying to go it alone. So I really like the P3 approach if you can find those willing partners. I think that concludes my presentation.
Thanks, Nick. And we've got a couple of questions. We've got a couple of minutes for questions if you're willing to answer them. I'm just going to do the first one from the chat, which is, what do you say when folks are, why should the city get involved with competing with commercial or private business?
You explain your reasons and recognize you're not going to win everybody over. A lot of them said this is the private sector's domain, and to that we said, well, they've been here 25 years. Why haven't they done it yet? You know, there's a lot of back and forth. It certainly would be wonderful if the private sector could just take this on and do it. If you don't have fiber in your community right now, it's probably because it's an NPV negative investment, meaning that the cost to build it out is going to be less than the return the private sector is expecting. And so what we're trying to close are those really hard to close gaps that require some public sector stimulus. And there is a way to do that where you can go from kind of an adversarial relationship with the private sector to one where they feel like, hey, were it not for the work of these public sector partners, we wouldn't be building today.
That's awesome. If there are any other folks who have questions, feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you. You can do that by the reactions tab down at the bottom and then click raise your hand. Anyone? I'm not seeing any pop up. How about this? If you don't know how to raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask Nick a question. You may get off the hook with just one question.
I'd be fine with that. And I am happy to reach out and connect with people offline as well if they'd like to learn more. I know I kind of talked fast. Wanted to try and keep you on schedule.
Yeah, I see one. Adam Brown has a question for you. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I just wanted to give him a hard time, actually. So. No, actually, I'm sorry. I actually had to leave the meeting for an hour, so I might have to go back and read your presentation for or watch it at the end. But one thing I've been wanting to do is to see if we can use some of our ARPA money to get the private sector to extend their network out. Rather than creating our own, but
yeah, I think that's a good approach. You know, it really depends on the gaps you're trying to close and how big they are. A little bit of incentive goes a long way, you know, and I think some of them, especially if you can avoid attaching a lot of strings to it, you can get results faster. So that's where we've kind of crafted development agreements that are tailored to the situation. And then recognizing also that sometimes you got to kind of dig in a little bit and say, no, this is not in the best interest of the public, and we'll reserve the right to go around you, over you, or through you if we have to. You know, there's carrots and sticks, but ultimately, if you have private ISPs, there's a lot of complexity in managing these networks, and I would not encourage any city to get into the private side where you're taking customer calls. My internet's not working. Can you help me reboot my modem? Government labor is very expensive. So I would steer clear of that side of the equation unless you really have your ducks in a row.
Who's your private sector partner on that?
We're working with OTC Connections.
Okay.
We did try to work with CenturyLink. There's still an option, but with their acquisitions and mergers and everything, they're really going in a different direction. And so our ultimate goal, what we saw as the gold standard, was an open access network where we've incentivized the construction of the line, and we can essentially work with anyone who wants to come in and provide service. Unfortunately, under current rules, a lot of the federal funding sources don't want to fund open access networks. So that can become a bit of a challenge to accomplish.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I may catch up with you later on what I missed. So, thanks.
Thanks, Nick. I don't see any more questions in the chat or any other hands raised, but we do have a request. Am I good to share your contact information since you are a free 90 free government employee?
Yeah, I work cheap. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to, you know, if we can save some folks time and help them along, the better access we have throughout Oregon, the better we'll all do. So more than happy to reach out and talk with anybody offline.
Awesome. And it's so awesome what you're doing in the city of John Day and with Grant County Digital. And I hope that, you know, the population continues to grow for your guys' community and for the county. With that, I think you're all.
And I do have some, Jenna, I have one question.
Go ahead.
So, Nicholas, what kind of internal rate of return do you guys have? Like, are you looking at a payback period of 3 years, 5 years? What are you looking at?
The target for our private provider is 3 years. We sort of shifted that conversation in a different direction because what we saw as the real reward for them is not ROI on existing customers. Pretty much anywhere they go, they're going to have a 68 to 72% take rate. What we saw as the real carrot was opening up new residential neighborhoods and new commercial and industrial development to broaden that customer base. So as part of these proposals, and it was actually just last month, the Planning Commission approved 2 master plan developments for 115 home sites. And this fiber will go to each of those communities. And we also opened up another 15 acres of mixed use commercial and industrial land. And so as we do the land development with the land developer, we're also including this broadband component so that each of those lots has fiber. And that's really where, that's a 20% increase in housing in our market. That's really where we saw the biggest ROI for them, is just adding that number of customers to their existing network for little to no additional capital costs. It's almost pure profits if we're doing the land development, that's really a very appealing proposition for them.
That's really helpful to know in a specific city. We kind of cover the in-betweens. And so knowing, we've tried to craft partnerships with, local co-ops or companies that have come to us and said, hey, we want to work on this area. And then, we're trying to figure out, okay, because there's not much more to connect to. So there's not necessarily a growth piece in that. It might get them further down the network, but not necessarily a large development. So I appreciate, knowing that, of course, each one of these agreements are going to be different depending on the communities you're trying to serve. So thank you.
Okay, and that is time. So Nick, I hope you have a good rest of your Monday. You're more than welcome to stick around if you'd like. Now everyone has your email address. I apologize for the potential of 83 extra emails you might have to go through with all the participants on here. And I really appreciate your time this morning.
No problem at all. Thank you, guys.
Okay, with that, we do have a break now. So we're going to break until 11:15. So a little bit longer break than earlier. Feel free to just turn off your cameras and mute yourself and then come on back. We'll go into breakout rooms again. I'm going to try to jumble them up a little bit so that folks can meet with different people and you can hear different stories. We're really going to talk about how people, where you're at in your broadband journey and whether or not you're in it's just an idea to information gathering, coming to things like this, or are you out there applying and planning so that you're eligible for federal dollars? Are you applying for things? And maybe there might be folks in your breakout rooms that might be someone you can partner with in the future. So that's what we're looking at next up on the agenda. And I'll see everyone back here at 11:15. I think one of the things that came up just towards the end of the breakout room that I was in is, what does access actually mean when you're talking about digital equity? And that can mean service infrastructure. Are there actual fiber lines going to people's homes? Do we have the infrastructure in place? But also affordability. digital literacy? Do your consumers and your community members know how to use the technology that is available to them? So just keep that kind of in your mind, like in the back of your mind when we talk about this. It can mean a lot of different things to different sectors of your community as well. And that the one thing with broadband, if you haven't noticed already, is it's a very complex issue, though it seems very, very simple to get everyone connected. And for a lot of things, different parts of the state within a community, there's no real silver bullet. So we kind of have to come at it at different angles. But with that, we're going to kind of transition in to our later another set of presentations. And we're going to focus in different ways how you can leverage this. I know Nick Green swore that public-private partnership was the way to go, and that communities might not want to take on some of the customer controls when it comes to broadband. But that's definitely an option, and there are other folks who have decided to take on that responsibility. You heard from the mayor of Hillsborough earlier that they came up with Highlight, which is essentially an internet utility that the city runs. They are not one of a kind. There are a handful of municipally owned networks within the state of Oregon. And one of those today is going to be giving us a presentation. That's MyNet, which was started from the cities of Monmouth and Independence, and how they partnered together to create their network. So I'm going to turn it over to the city manager of Independence to kind of let us know why they chose a public network and decided to take that in-house. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jenna. And I do think we have a little bit of a different perspective, just because I think we're a lot further down the road than many of you, as you're really looking at adding broadband to your community and looking at the grant monies that are available. And so I'm just going to kind of walk through a little bit about what MyNet is, so you kind of understand the basics. And then talk about some of the benefits that our community have seen. And then really the last part will just be focused a little bit on partnerships and talk about what that looks like. So just to kind of cut to the end, the reality is if MyNet, which is Monmouth and Independence, joined together to form this broadband utility, would we do it again? And the answer is yes. Although I would have to say that it would be significantly different if we had a opportunity to do it again, and not because I think that the cities feel any differently about the partnership or anything else, but because simply the market changed very significantly over the time when we formed MyNet. So just to kind of form that out, when MyNet was formed and it started in the early 2000s, at that point in time, in order to provide services, you really needed to provide triple play. So you needed to provide not only the broadband capability and internet service provider, but also phone and TV. So those two pieces, especially the TV piece, are extraordinarily complicated. Because you not only have to have your satellites as well as all the equipment to run that, but you also need to be negotiating contracts with all the providers of cable TV into the system. And so that was the direction that MyNet chose to go. And I think that at that point in time, that probably was the only option that they had, because you couldn't just provide broadband. But the landscape is significantly different now, because you have so many different options for digital TV, as well as phones now via voice over internet protocol. Phone systems are common. And that's actually where MyNet is today. We just about a year and a half ago dropped all of the TV that MyNet was doing and went with a digital provider, as well as updated all the equipment in the system so that phone systems could be hooked in as well. So we still provide all three services, but it's really more of a digital economy and more broadband based. As a matter of fact, it's entirely broadband based. And that makes setting up a utility 1,000 times easier and quite frankly, less costly, which I think was probably one of the biggest challenges that Minot has had. I think you guys kind of all know, and we've kind of been talking about, just the capital items that you would need to do to do this. They are expensive. I think one of the good things about public side of this versus whether you go public as we did, or you go public-private, is the reality is your payback period from a public perspective can be much, much longer than what a private provider would be looking for. So as you're looking at those partnerships, remember that you have the opportunity to look at a 20-year horizon to kind of pay off some of the high capital expenditures versus a private company that's going to be looking for much of a quicker return on their investment. Nick and Jenna hit on this at the beginning. Is Nick mentioned that the operation support for a utility is a big consideration. I know that's a consideration that I look at whether I'm trying to do something in a parks and recreation area or any area, is what are the ongoing operational costs. And I hear what Nick said, but actually in Minot's situation, it's actually our biggest asset. And the reason is because we have, once you get to a certain point, and that's where the partnerships really come in, if you have a big enough group of people that you're serving, you can then have enough returns to basically support that. It is a big lift, though. I mean, you have administrative support, you have your technical service support that you need for your broadband equipment, and then you have all the customer service and billing things that go into it, and your field and operations support to provide those services as well. So essentially, what Minot is its own company. It really is a separate entity that runs on itself, and it makes enough money as of this year to actually pay off all of its debt. It could have been in that situation a lot earlier had we not done the triple play. Or not had been required to do the triple play. But it is definitely something that covers all of its costs, including all the administrative costs. But the key there, and where Nick is absolutely right, is you have to have a large group of people or partnerships in order to support all of that overhead that you're going to need to run a system. And so, for example, Monmouth and Independence, I think most everybody knows where we're at, but we're actually just about 13 miles southeast of Salem, and southwest of Salem, excuse me. And so we're kind of rural, we're kind of urban, but we couldn't find anybody who was willing to provide services to our community. But we have about 20,000 people in our community. So when you have, and I would say that's a pretty good minimum of what you would need in order to really have all those services. But you can get there through partnerships, and I think that's really what we've talked about and what we've done. So, one of the things that I hear pretty commonly is, why should we do broadband? Why should we do broadband? And I've heard that here today is what makes it worth it? What are the selling points that I can take to my community? And I'll be honest with you, it's a little bit hard because there isn't just one thing that you can point to that actually says, okay, well, broadband is worth it to do to my community. But I'll just, having been here, part of it is just resident well-being. The reality is our citizens and residents feel very positive about having broadband in their house. It is something that just makes them feel good. They feel very good about the service that the cities provide, and they're very happy that it happens. So just that positive impact and influence is something that I think people really need to consider, because while you can't quantify that in dollars, you can certainly quantify that in people who are happy with their local governments and who are willing to go and do what they need to do to improve their quality of life. It's affordability. Our service is cheaper than the private companies, and so we have about 85% of the residents in our community who actually subscribe to our service. So it isn't much of a competition, at least at this point. I mentioned earlier that we have businesses that need to provide TV services because they're a bar or something, and they need to provide all those TV channels and everything else. Obviously, they go with a different company than we do. But as far as the residential market, we have very high users, and I think like about 85% of our residents are actually hooked up to MyNet. We also do provide Lifeline Services, which is something for very affordable for people that need to do. That's about $10 a month for that service. It certainly isn't a gigabyte of data, but it certainly is something less. And we do have the ability to provide a gigabyte to every house if we needed to, but obviously not everybody needs that, and so the prices are structured accordingly. Just a couple of other things. Healthcare loves having that service here. It's telemedicine is something we're developing based on that. We have business support, which you obviously hear a lot about in development. We're working on an ag tech initiative, which we wouldn't be able to do if we weren't able to have businesses come in to be in our community to support what the agricultural businesses are doing around that. So that is a growing thing and something that broadband allows us to do. Tourism, we have free Wi-Fi in our parks and municipal buildings. Our residents love that, especially those who just quite frankly don't have access to internet, period. They can, and they do, just drive their car up out of sight of our library and connect up the internet and do the things that they need to do in off hours when our library isn't open. Emergency management, obviously a big deal. We certainly have the ability to do emergency events, and we're adding to that capacity through some grants from broadband capacity. And one of the things that we were able to do through CARES was actually to get a grant from the state to hook up every student who didn't have broadband in our communities. So any student who needed to have schooling, we were actually able to go finish those last houses out or apartment complexes and either paint them with Wi-Fi or with broadband connectivity so that they were able to make sure that they were able to go to school. And those are just some of the advantages, but I think like I said, the resident well-being is probably the primary one. People just feel really good about having that service. So as you're thinking about what people can use in your community to feel good about government, that's certainly one of them. So just kind of getting into partnerships, and my time's limited here, so I'm kind of moving quickly. And I've seen some questions here on what exactly the costs are. You can go up on MyNet broadband and look up the different costs are tiered by, of course, what amount of data that you want to see, or if somebody wants to copy that, post that in the comments, that would be great too. But why did we partnership? So, honestly, we did it because we were too rural to attract a broadband provider. And the community just felt like it was something that was important to provide. And we honestly knew that the private sector was just not going to come into our community and do it. So it was either the cities do it or it wasn't going to happen. Neither city alone was big enough to do it. Many of the costs could be shared, especially operational costs. And quite frankly, the debt that was needed to take on a system like this was larger than either city could afford. So Monmouth and Independence sit right next to each other. The towns have actually kind of grown together at this point. So it made natural partnership to move forward and to provide the service together. I have to say, after being partners with Monmouth on this for a long time, cities can kind of be competitive in certain areas. This just isn't an area where cities are competitive. The reality is you do more together on these kind of things. And so the more that you can provide and the more partnerships you can actually bring in, I think the better off that you are in the long run. This is actually one of those things that both cities feel really good about. And we work collaboratively on this. from the beginning and until today. So partnerships, just the organizational structure is the two cities got together and formed an ORS 190 special district, essentially, that has a separate board of directors. That board of directors is highly controlled by the cities. The two city managers sit on that, along with two citizen representatives and two council members. That is something that we probably will change down the road, because what it does do is that type of control is necessary because of the debt that we're taking on, but at the same time, it does limit our ability to partner with others. Other cities don't necessarily want the cities of Independence and Monmouth to control what's going on with their broadband as they're looking at partnerships. So that's something we're certainly looking towards changing as our debt comes down and we get to that point where we feel comfortable enough that we know that it's going to get all paid off. I think the cities can really back off on making sure that we have tight control over the operations and bring that forward. Probably just talking about public-private partnerships, we ended up partnering with Willamette Valley Fiber. We are a public-public partnership, but the opportunity for Dallas, which is about 15 miles away, came up as we were looking to expand. And because of our debt levels, there wasn't a level of comfort to move and put in another system in Dallas. But there was definitely the opportunity to do that. And that's where I think Minet's big asset, which is, the operations, especially the customer service and billing, came into play. And Minet was able to work a deal out with a private partner to actually go in and put the capital assets in, which is a little different because their return on that investment is going to take some time. But they were willing to do it, and Minet really has done all of the work. So they constructed the system, and Minet really is now providing all the technical support. They're doing the connections from the fiber to the house, and they're really providing that service level that I think is a challenge for everybody to figure out. So that is a public-private partnership that we've entered into. And I think as Minet looks forward, they are, we'll also be looking at other partnerships, especially for where there's grant opportunities available, whether that's through the ARPA or the infrastructure bills. If cities can actually put the bulk of the assets on the poles or in the ground, Minet has the ability to do a lot of the operational support, which is a big deal. It's a big lift, and I think that's, like I said many times, is their biggest asset. So as you've heard, grants that are going to be out there, at least what I'm hearing from the state and from others, is going to be prioritized based on partnerships. So they're going to be looking to make sure that there are partnerships that are being formed through this. And I think that Minet has put itself in a good position just through some really good fiscal control, especially over the last years, to put itself to partner. And I think that many others would do. Just a couple things about partnerships I'll mention as you're thinking about it is, even if you do set this up on your own, you probably should be thinking about partnerships down the road, because the reality is forming a utility like this is going to attract others, and undoing it later is a bit of a challenge. So as we're looking at our intergovernmental agreements and trying to figure things out, we definitely need to think about how other people are going to view the management structure that you have in place over your system. And then you also should think about how you're going to set up as really its own separate business entity. I think that's really important, because you probably need to make a decision. Is it going to be a utility? Is it going to be a separate portion of funds, or is it going to be commingled with other operations? Don't commingle it with other operations. That is going to be really problematic for you down the road. And you may have an opportunity to actually sell the business to the private partners, private sector a number of years down the road once some of the debt is gone. So really think carefully about what you want to do 20 years down the road when you set this up, not what you want to do day one, which might be expedient, but might cause you a lot of lost opportunities down the road.
Thanks, Tom. We've got a couple of minutes for questions if you're willing to entertain some. I had one question for you. This is a historical question, so I don't know is an acceptable answer, but is it true that you guys got special public works funds way at the very beginning of MyNet's inception from the state?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. So I would have to look that up, whether or not MyNet did. It would not surprise me if they did, but I'm not certain of that.
Yeah, I can follow up offline and with you on that one. But the only reason I bring that up is because I know that there was one other intergovernmental agency that you leveraged that fund, and I thought MyNet might have been one of them as well, which was Q Life in the Dalles. And that special public works funds dollars is through Business Oregon, but the caveat is that the funding has to be into a project that is then publicly owned. So anyone who's looking at, publicly owning a municipal network, that may or may not be a funding mechanism for you. And it's not usually leveraged for telecommunications purposes. It's usually leveraged for water, wastewater. So I just want to put that out there to folks on this call. But I think I just wanted to ask that question first, but if anyone else has any questions, we've got a couple more minutes before our next presenter. You can raise your hand and then we'll call on you.
Yes, and thanks, Dan and others for looking up the prices for MyNet. They're in the chat if people are wondering.
Any questions for Tom? Rod Cross, Mayor Cross, go ahead.
Hi, Tom. My question is, so I keep seeing the public entities are rather, compared to Toledo, large. And I'm trying to get a feeling for what the baseline scale is that these public utilities could work.
Well, I think that is something you notice, and like I mentioned, a lot of this really comes down to that operational piece. And like I mentioned, with 20,000 people between Independence, Monmouth, and now you add Dallas in there, now you have 40,000 people who can cover those operational costs. I think that's one of the big challenges that you have. I think the other big challenge is, getting the broadband actually to the community to start with. We're in an area where we actually don't own, the first mile back to the Piddock or to another building. We actually pay for that service. But we're in an area where we can do that because there are providers that actually do that as well. So, I think that, the capital costs, are relatively the same, whether as far as putting it on the poles or putting it in the ground, whether you're, 20,000 or whether you're 2,000, because it's just scalable. And you're probably going to have the private sector do a lot of that work anyway. It's really those operational costs, that the things that really you need to figure out how you're going to do that. Because, if you want to put it in your existing staff, that's going to be problematic on many different fronts. And it is a fair amount of work, but with more partnerships and more opportunities, you can kind of get there.
And Mayor Cross, to kind of add to your question, the smallest municipally owned network that I know of is RiverNet in the city of Maupin. It's less than 500 people. That's their population size. But I know they own the network, but they have a lot of private partners for long haul, backhaul providers. And I would really suggest reaching out to Mayor Ewing in Maupin, because that was kind of his project. And I know he's very proud of it. And that came, and I think it might have been around the time that Highlight came online, RiverNet came online. So it's been very recent in the last 3 years that they kind of came up with this network. So it can be for small communities too, but it has to be looked at a little bit differently.
Thank you, Jenna.
Yeah. Any more questions? I think we have time for one more. Okay, not seeing any hands. Thank you so much, Tom, for presenting on MyNet, and congratulations on getting to a point where your debt is pretty much paid off.
Yeah. Oh, well, let me make sure that that's not misunderstood. Our debt is not paid off. We are actually making enough money to actually pay the debt, which is a big difference. We still have probably 20 years to pay the debt, but we have been having to supplement that from the City of Independence, from our water fund, and the City of Monmouth through their Power and Light Fund. And again, a lot of that is because of the triple play and the size of the debt. But no, we were very happy the day that we actually pay that all off. But it has been a big lift. Although I will say that the community is so happy with the service that they would do it again, even with that.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. But it's exciting that you guys have been around for as long as you have, and that your community continues to be happy with you. I will turn it over to Mallory to introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Jenna. I see he is able to join us again. This is OBEC Chair Joe Fresnel, who also has just a whole lot of background and experience in this space, and so happy to have him here with us today to talk a little bit about private-public partnerships and some different forms that can take. I'll hand it to you, Joe. Do you need? Oh,
there we go.
Going.
Oh, well, look, I was going to share my screen, but Jenna is so far ahead of me. She is so good. She is so good. I love that. So I do apologize. I had to step away for an hour. I had my company's monthly board meeting, and that one I could not move. So I missed the last hour, and I hate that. But I am back, and I'm going to go through this, and really I want to talk about some of the different models, and the coming in on the tail end of the MyNet discussion. I think this actually will be pretty timely. So yeah, let's look at, now this is not all encompassing. This is kind of 4 broad brushstrokes of different ways to approach solving your broadband problem. So we're going to talk today about status quo, and you guys are all going to hate that one. Open access network, which is actually the Maupin model, publicly owned and operated network, and public-private partnership. I don't have a pure muni in here. That's an option as well. And for those of you who want to chat about that a little bit, I did run the Ashland Fiber Network for several years, and that's how I got my toes wet in Oregon broadband. That's what brought me out west. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk about the status quo. And I'm going to talk pros and cons of each of these, and I'm going to leave enough time at the end for questions, because I suspect there will be questions about these different options. And this is a presentation I've done several times already in different forms, most recently to the Tillman Lightwave board. So Commissioner Yamamoto, I think you're still on the call. This will look familiar to you as he's seen this. So option 1. So here we are, and we're winding down, hopefully through the pandemic, and people aren't yelling at you as much anymore because kids are out of school, and so they're not doing online education like they were. So what do you do about broadband? You could just wait for the private sector to come and solve your problem. Now, I would say 2 or 3 years ago, the likelihood of that happening, if you're a rural, remote community on its own, pretty slim. But now there's so much attention and there's so much money being thrown at this. there is some likelihood that someone is going to look at your community and go, this is probably an opportunity for my business. In this case, and I'm giving you the Adams, Athena, and I've got it misspelled, Adams, Athena, Weston model. The three mayors of Adams, Athena, and Weston, sorry about misspelling Athena. If anyone is on the phone from Athena, I will fix that, I promise. Those three mayors, and it was three women at the time, and I love that, led by the then mayor of Weston, who was a remarkable broadband champion. Now, she's passed away from cancer since, but those three leaders convinced the local ISP to build fiber to the home there. They were so passionate about it, they'd done their homework, and it looked like a good enough opportunity that they were able to advocate and encourage an ISP to come in and build. So the pros from the local government perspective, no needed additional action or investment from the county or the municipality, whichever it is. I mean, and that may or may not be completely true in this case. Adams and Weston both got small economic development grants to help with a little bit of the underground, so opening some trenches, because they had some underground subdivision, very small parts of town that wouldn't have otherwise been economically feasible to build fiber into. The cons, obviously, timing may be slower than desired. Everybody wants it yesterday, and they're frustrated that they don't have it yesterday. And so this approach, while it is very, very, very conservative from a municipal leadership standpoint, it's likely to be too slow for your constituents. So I'm going to just swipe that off the page. Jenna, let's do the next one. The next one is open access. And you know, Moppin is an example of that. The Ashland Fiber Network is an example of that, where the municipality is not the ISP, but they've built the network and then allow that network to be used by different ISPs for a fee. So the pros are it attracts competition. Now that can be a good thing or a bad thing. We're going to talk about that. It drives lower prices. Counties and municipalities wouldn't have to be responsible for the premise equipment, the equipment that's actually at the customer's home, generally speaking. Although some open networks, the municipality or the county actually owns everything, and all the ISP does is the customer relationship and the billing. Cons, if you own it as a municipality or as a county, then there is no property tax revenue. And that's something that is often overlooked when we start talking about building these public networks, is there is no ongoing property tax revenue that flows back into the municipality or the county from that network. Counties and municipalities would be responsible for maintaining the network and all the electronics. And you know, you heard, and I heard just at the end of the MyNet presentation, you know, that is, the operational costs are more significant than most people understand. This is a complex business, and it's always changing. Even with fiber, the electronics are changing rapidly. And this is I wanted to talk about competition. And you know, I'm a country boy. My mom's from Texas. She grew up in South Texas, and we had horses, and I worked on a farm through high school, and hauled hay and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to use a colloquialism that maybe you'll get, maybe you won't. If you got too many pigs feeding at the trough, the pigs starve. And so if you have too much competition in a small market, what happens is the ISPs, there's not enough revenue for them to really do a good job. And so customer service suffers. You have a race to the bottom. No one owns the customer, and there's finger pointing. So the ISP is going to always say that whatever the customer's frustration is, whatever their problem is, it's the owner of the infrastructure, so the municipality or the county, it's their fault, even if it's not their fault. And often the county or the municipality is going to be pointing the finger at the ISP and saying, no, It's your fault. And so who's caught in the middle? The customer is caught in the middle. And that is a frustrating place for the customer to be. Now, this idea of competition, sometimes, and we're going to talk about a couple of models where you can solve that problem with a single provider. But with a single provider, especially in these small remote markets, you've got to make sure that you hold the provider accountable through a contract. And no, you were right. You were right. You did it. That was a perfect segue, even though it wasn't necessarily intended. So, and we'll come back to that. But this publicly owned and operated network, this is the one where, I mean, it's appealing, it is attractive, and you've got complete control. If you own it in total, the public sector owns it in total, you've got complete control. Cons, no property tax revenue. Again, counties and municipalities are responsible for everything. I will tell you, where internet access is concerned, it is hard to make people happy because often it's their Wi-Fi or their device, or it's, you know, just their ability to understand how to access the internet, but you own it. And so you're going to own that whole customer relationship. You're going to own having to deal with all of that frustration. It's not like water. Water's on or off, and it's either safe to drink or it's not. Electricity is either on or it's off. The internet is wildly more complex than that, and people's ability to access it is harder. They're not just turning on a switch. And I know, you know, some of the questions in the chat through the earlier parts of just the lack of understanding of how this thing really works can make it hard to manage. So let's go to the next one, Jenna. Public-private partnership, and there are varying degrees of this, and this is where I wanted to talk to you guys about some of the different models. And I heard Q-Life being mentioned earlier. I think Jenna brought it up. With a public-private partnership, if it's structured right, you get the best of both worlds. So, and working with folks like Q-Life or Tillman Lightwave, where they own the middle mile, when it's publicly owned, some of the benefits are the piece that's publicly owned, you can actually get access to dollars that the private sector can't get access to. So some of these grants are only available to the public sector. And when part of the network is owned by the public can take a longer view of it. And we heard that about MyNet, where, you know, they're okay with it taking a long time to get to the point where they were paying the debt themselves and not having to fund it with some other fund, whether it's a water fund or an electric fund, because they take a longer view of things. The private sector often is going to need, because of their commitments to their shareholders and the banks, is going to need a 18-month to, on the outside, 5-year ROI. And that's a pretty long view for a private sector. The Q-Life model is where the county and the city, so Q-Life is the city of the Dalles, Wasco County, and I think the hospital was involved at some, they're on the board, but they own the middle mile, which facilitates the building of the last mile. It facilitated having ISPs, multiple ISPs come in and actually build in Wasco County. And kind of the same thing in Maupin, except they own the whole network, but it's an open network. So they've got a couple of ISPs operating on that network, providing service in Maupin. And it's almost equally split between the two ISPs as far as customer base. Counties and municipalities can contribute to reduce the cost of the last mile build, but the private sector builds, owns, and operates the last mile. This is Sherman County model. So Sherman County had some wind farm money, and they went out to RFP. They found a company that was willing to partner with them. They subsidized the fiber to the home build to make it work financially for the ISP. The ISP, so they didn't pay for the whole thing. The ISP came in, they contributed a big chunk of money. They built the middle mile along with Sherman County and the last mile. They're the only, so they own it, they maintain it, and they operate it. The ISP does. What Sherman County gets through contract is all of the benefits of competition, but without the competitors starving to death. So Sherman County, in their contract, this is what I was talking about. They've got pricing, they've got speeds, they've got quality of service, they've got response times. All that is built into the contract. So Sherman County has all of the benefits of competition without the detriment of competition in really small markets. And Sherman County is the second least densely populated county in the state. For those of you, I know on AOC, you guys probably know that, but the LOC participants, you may or may not know that. Second least densely populated county. Every one of their communities has fiber to the home. The least densely populated county, Wheeler County, this is a different model. This is similar to Maupin, but different. So Wheeler County actually paid for the build and owns the entire last mile for Wheeler, Fossil, Mitchell, and Spray, the three cities that are in Wheeler County. That is publicly owned. But the private sector, one ISP responded to their RFP, was selected and built that network, and then operates it as a single provider on a long-term contract. Kind of like Sherman County, but Wheeler County, the public owns the network, but it's a single provider providing service. So public-private partnerships, again, take a lot of different forms, and it really depends on what works for your particular situation, but they can really provide great benefits. And that's why I'm a big fan of public-private partnerships. I think my next slide is questions. No, challenges. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot this slide. So this is if you're in business at all right now, you know that there is a labor shortage going on. It is every sector, it's every industry. It is very difficult to hire new employees, and telecommunications, it's very difficult to find contractors for design, engineering, and construction with available resources. We're the first, my company where I work, not OBAC, but my company where I work, we're the first technology company east of the Cascades to join the Technology Association of Oregon, which is an association representing technology companies all up and down the I-5 corridor in Oregon up into Vancouver. They include Vancouver, Washington, just because it's kind of contiguous to Portland. Had a job fair about 6-8 weeks ago where, and this was their big annual job fair. Now these are tech companies, great jobs, great pay, great benefits, exciting futures, you know, a career. There were 200 jobs represented, easy. I'm sorry, 600 jobs represented. And 60 people showed up to the job fair looking for a job, 60. One company was looking for 200 employees. One company in Portland was trying to hire 200 people. We've got 25 openings, so we can't find anybody to work. And then the supply chain, we knew that the supply chain was stressed because of COVID, the fight with China, you know, manufacturing problems, chip shortages, all those kinds of things. We're now seeing large orders for materials. They're now shipping 8 to 12 months is what they're telling us. And even electronics, we're being rationed with the electronics that we can buy every month. So our major vendors are allocating their resources out, trying to meet everybody's needs. And it's just getting worse day to day. I actually had updated this slide. So if we were looking at my version, it would say 8 to 12 months. That's how bad it's gotten just since I sent this slide presentation to Jenna. It's gotten worse. So with that, now we go to questions.
Thanks, Joe.
Surely there are questions.
I don't see in the chat yet, but folks, feel free to raise your hand or just jump in. We've got a couple of minutes, I think, while Jenna sets up our next breakouts.
If not, you guys, my email address is jfranell@bluemountainnet.com. jfranell, JFRANELL @bluemountainnet.com. Or Representative Marsh knows how to get a hold of me. Jenna knows how to get a hold of me. Mallory knows how to get a hold of me. Happy to help any way I can.
I see Matt jump on.
Yeah, I have a question for JS Matt Brown from the city of St. Helens.
Yes.
And I'm curious if you have any of the contracts that you were talking about and the different ways to organize the structure. Do you have any kind of sample contracts that other cities can use if we have partnerships, or if your organization is willing to help foster that partnership and come to those agreements?
Well, yeah, sure. And Matt, I can get Mallory and or Jenna, because the contracts that are with like Wheeler County and Sherman County, all that's public record. So, we can use those as templates. And I was going to say earlier, the associations, both the LOC and AOC, they're really helpful for members. And I know LOC has a franchise template that is neutral, and it works. I've several of the recent franchises that I've negotiated were super easy because the cities were members, and they went to the League of Oregon Cities and got the template. And so it was something we were familiar with, and we did a couple of tweaks and had a franchise, and it was painless for the city and for us. So yeah, happy to work with both AOC and LOC to try and provide some templates on what that looks like. And then you can always call me either in my role as OVAC chair or as president of Blue Mountain Networks. I'm happy to help either way.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Joe. And just to be clear, there will be a big packet of information coming out to everyone with all of these presentations, with contact information, and even more that we just couldn't really fit into the actual presentations today. With that, Jenna, I think we're ready to go into our next breakouts. It'll be, a continuation of the conversations, but we hope to focus a little bit in this one on partnerships. So who has your community partner? Who are you looking to in the future? Maybe someone that you've met here today, but talking about partnerships. Hand it to you, Jenna. Are we breaking out? We're breaking out.
Yep, everyone can join the rooms now. Mallory, are you on? Because I can't see you.
I'm here. I can't see you either.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to start kind of winding down the day. I hope some of these breakout rooms helped with folks kind of chatting. I know we barely scratched the surface in just talking about broadband and what all is out there. I have one slide of some resources that you might want to use, and I want to reiterate that we will be sending a resource packet with all of the presentations you saw today, some useful links, some good contact information if you would like to harass some of the speakers, because they're great minds. And yeah, and then we'll go into closing after this, and I'll let Mallory kind of have the final closing thoughts. But thank you guys for kind of sticking out this virtual webinar for almost 4 hours and participating. We really appreciate it. So with that, I'll share my screen and we'll go over a couple of just off the top resources. First and foremost, you can bug Mallory or I anytime. You're not actually bothering us. We're here to serve the counties and the cities. I know at least for the League of Oregon Cities, we're constantly trying to create models and guides and things like that. Or even just to kind of introduce you to the Joe Fresnels of the world, who we spend a lot of meetings with, and some of the providers. If you have broadband action teams in your area, link up with them, or find one that's not necessarily in your area and ask them how to create a broadband action team and bring that to your area so that you can get folks together. Don't forget about economic development districts and your economic development folks. They're a big player in this game, especially now, and it's becoming more of a priority. You've heard about the EDA grants and things like that from Nick Green. That's from an economic development perspective. And that's going to become a bigger driver when it comes to broadband. Of course, Business Oregon, the state broadband office, is doing a lot of good work in this area. USDA, which Tim just dropped his contact information. It'll also be in the packet. Make sure that you reach out to them because they deal with a lot of the funds. Most importantly, I know that we kind of structured this day around public partnerships and the public side of broadband. That's not to say that we are the only players in this space. In fact, your local providers are probably going to be good resources for you. And I really, really encourage you to reach out to the folks in your community or find out who's providing service in your community, and building relationships there, because they are a good resource. And they're, like Daniel put in his presentation, the Infrastructure Summit or even the Oregon Connections Conference is a really good way to kind of meet and greet with various providers around the state and other city, county officials, hospitals, things like that. Link Oregon, which I know Steve Corbido was pretty active in the chat today. They're a middle mile provider. They work with public entities and nonprofits. They're a good resource to look into. I said this in my last breakout room, but do not underestimate the power that the public sector has when it comes to broadband, and your ability to get resources. That means your school districts, your special districts, your fire districts, your libraries, cities, counties, all of you jurisdictions. This networking between each other can be very helpful in not recreating the wheel when you're trying to get through all of the stuff that is part of the complex broadband picture. And like I said, there will be a resource packet. I'm going to start trying to find a terminology or dictionary of broadband terms to also include in that, so that folks have that for the future and other conversations. And that's our last slide, and I will let Mallory close this out.
Well, thank you, Jenna. And I just want to give a big shout out to you. I'm new to AOC in the last year, new to the broadband policy world, and Jenna has been just a wealth of knowledge. So thank you. Your cities are lucky to have you. Also, just thank you to all of our state and federal partners that joined today. I hope this, we kind of had two goals for this conversation, which was to learn from each other, city and county officials and staff to learn from each other, to learn from our state and federal partners, but then also from our state and federal partners to learn about really what's happening on the ground, and to help focus on this problem together and get some really targeted, useful resources. With that, unless there are any burning questions folks have to leave in the chat, I think we'll give you all about 12 minutes of your day back. Thanks for sticking with us. I hope this was informative, and please, like Jenna said, don't hesitate to reach out to either of us or anyone else who's lots of emails in the chat right now. So thank you, everyone.